The shuttle's landing struts groaned against Thalrix's surface, kicking up clouds of rust-colored dust that sparkled with microscopic metal flakes. Daniel Cross pressed his face against the porthole, watching the alien landscape materialize through the settling debris. 3 years of academic exile had led him here, to this backwater planet at the edge of chartered space, where his theories about interspecies emotional communication meant nothing to anyone. The airlock hissed open, and immediately his lungs filled with the planet's signature cocktail of metallic tang and hot resin. It wasn't unpleasant, exactly, but it coated the back of his throat like syrup mixed with copper coins. Daniel shouldered his research pack and stepped onto the ramp, his boots making hollow echoes that seemed wrong somehow, as if the planet itself was hollow beneath its crust. "Welcome to paradise," muttered Kip, his assistant robot, wheeling down behind him. The unit's chrome plating had seen better days, pockmarked with dents and scratches from a dozen previous expeditions. One of its optical sensors flickered intermittently, giving it a perpetual wink. Temperature hot enough to fry circuits. Humidity swamp level. Chance of survival calculating. Error. Insufficient data. Daniel ignored the commentary. Kip's pessimistic personality matrix was a quirk he'd grown fond of over the years, even if it did great during moments of genuine anxiety. And right now, watching the delegation approaching from the settlement, anxiety was definitely winning. The Lurnari moved with a fluid grace that made humans look clumsy by comparison. Their bodies were humanoid in the loosest sense, covered in short, dense fur that ranged from deep amber to charcoal black. But it was their faces that caught visitors off guard. Elongated features, vertical pupils that could dilate to near circles or contract to mere slits, and ears that swiveled independently like radar dishes. Beautiful and unsettling in equal measure. The elder leading the group was ancient by any standard, his fur gone silver-white with age. He stopped precisely 3 meters away, the traditional greeting distance Daniel had memorized from his rushed cultural briefing. Behind him stood 4 others, but Daniel's attention locked onto the one furthest back. She was trying very hard to look anywhere but at him. Her fur was a rich mahogany, with subtle tiger stripes that caught the binary sunset. Athletic build, probably military-trained judging by her stance. One hand rested casually on what looked like an energy blade hilt at her hip. But what drew his eye, despite every warning in his cultural briefing, was her tail. It hung low, almost dragging in the dust, twitching with barely contained irritation. The briefing had been explicit. Never look at a Lurnari's tail. Never comment on it. Never acknowledge it exists. The tail was their most private form of expression, as intimate as reading someone's diary or medical records. To observe it deliberately was the height of rudeness. Daniel forced his gaze back to the elder, who had begun speaking in accented but clear standard. "Daniel Cross, you come seeking knowledge of our crystalline flora. The Council has agreed to your request, with conditions." "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Elder." Daniel paused, waiting for a name that didn't come. "Elder suffices. This is Asha." He gestured to the woman who still wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes. "She will guide you, ensure you survive. Nothing more." The word ignore wasn't spoken, but it hung in the air like the metallic dust. Asha's tail flicked once, sharp and dismissive, before she turned and began walking toward the jungle's edge without a word. "Charming," Kip buzzed. "I'm detecting strong dislike patterns in her body language. Also, fun fact, the murder rate for human researchers on Thalrix is 30% higher than galactic average." "Not helping, Kip," Daniel muttered, hurrying after Asha's retreating form. The elder and his delegation had already turned away, their business concluded. The transition from settlement to jungle was abrupt. One moment they were on packed earth paths between prefab structures. The next, they were swallowed by vegetation that defied easy categorization. trees, if you could call them that, twisted upward in helical patterns, their bark secreting the resin smell that permeated everything. Bioluminescent moss carpeted their trunks, pulsing with a slow rhythm like a sleeping heart. Asha moved through it all without hesitation, never looking back to see if Daniel was keeping up. Her tail, he noticed despite himself, had shifted from irritated swishing to a controlled stillness that somehow seemed even more hostile. "Watch your step," she said suddenly. Her first words to him. Her accent was lighter than the elders, musical despite the curtness. "The ground here is hungry." Daniel looked down just as his boot was about to land on what appeared to be ordinary moss. Asha's hand shot out, grabbing his arm and yanking him backward with surprising strength. The moss where his foot would have landed suddenly split open, revealing rows of thorn-like teeth that snapped at empty air. "Carnivorous moss," she explained, still not looking at him directly. "It feels for pressure, then strikes. You would have lost your foot. Maybe more." "Thank you," Daniel said, meaning it. His heart was racing, adrenaline making his fingers tingle. She dropped his arm like it burned her. "The council ordered me to keep you alive. Do not read more into it." They continued in silence for another hour, the jungle growing denser and stranger. Daniel found himself cataloging everything, the way certain plants turned to track their movement, the chittering of unseen creatures in the canopy, the patches of ground that glowed faintly where Asha stepped but remained dark under his feet. His researcher's mind couldn't help but theorize about the bioluminescent response to Lunari biochemistry. The attack came without warning. One moment Asha was cutting through a curtain of hanging vines with her energy blade. The next, something massive and green erupted from what Daniel had thought was a tree trunk. It was plant and predator combined. A nightmare of thorns and digestive sacs that moved with disturbing speed for something rooted to the ground. Asha shoved Daniel hard, sending him sprawling into the underbrush as a tendril, thick as his torso, whipped through the space where he'd been standing. She rolled in the opposite direction, her blade humming to life, with a sound like angry wasps. The plant thing had multiple appendages, each one capable of independent movement, and they all oriented toward the heat signatures of their prey. "Kip, infrared dampeners," Daniel shouted, scrambling for his pack. "Oh, sure. Let me just activate the technology we don't have," Kip replied. But the robot was already spraying coolant foam from its emergency reserves, creating false heat signatures that confused the plant momentarily. Asha used the distraction to dart in close, her blade severing two tendrils at their base. Thick, viscous sap sprayed from the wounds, sizzling where it hit the ground. The plant let out a sound that shouldn't have been possible without vocal cords. A keening wail that made Daniel's teeth ache. A third tendril, hidden beneath the forest floor, erupted directly beneath Asha. She tried to dodge, but it caught her ankle, yanking her off her feet. Her blade went flying, landing somewhere in the dense undergrowth. The tendril began reeling her toward an opening lined with what looked disturbingly like a throat. Daniel didn't think. He grabbed the emergency flare from his pack, cracked it against his knee to activate it, and hurled it directly into the plant's mouth. The effect was immediate and violent. The creature released Asha, all its tendrils writhing as it tried to expel the burning chemical fire from its digestive cavity. The smell was indescribable, like burning rubber mixed with rotting fruit. Asha rolled to her feet, retrieved her blade, and in 3 precise strikes, severed the main trunk. The plant thing collapsed, still twitching, but no longer a threat. They stood there for a moment, breathing hard, covered in sap and dirt. Asha's fur was matted on one side, and there was a shallow cut on her cheek from where she'd hit the ground. Daniel's hands were shaking from adrenaline. "You could have run," she said finally. And for the first time, she actually looked at him. Her eyes were golden, flecked with green. "You saved me first," Daniel replied. Seemed only fair to return the favor. Something shifted in her expression, too quick to read. But Daniel caught the movement of her tail in his peripheral vision. Just for a second. It had lifted slightly from its defensive low position. Not much, but enough. "We need to move," she said, turning away again. "That thing's death cry will attract scavengers. Some of them are worse." As they pushed deeper into the jungle, Daniel began mental notes. He would never commit to official records. The way Asha's tail went rigid when she heard a particular sound in the canopy. Probably a predator she recognized. How it curled slightly when she found a safe path through toxic-looking purple flowers. The quick, almost invisible twitch when Kip made a particularly bad joke about their odds of survival. He was breaking the most fundamental rule of Lurnari-human interaction. But he couldn't help himself. This was what had destroyed his career in the first place. This inability to not see patterns, to not try to understand. Dr. Selric Morn had called it an obsession, right before he'd submitted the review that branded Daniel's work as fantasy disguised as anthropology. But watching Asha navigate the dangers of Thalrix with him, saving his life even as she maintained her cold distance, Daniel began to see something his academic rivals had missed. The tale wasn't just emotional expression. It was a complete parallel communication system, saying everything the Lurnari wouldn't or couldn't say with words. As the binary suns began their descent toward the horizon, painting the jungle in shades of orange and violet, they reached a clearing where ancient stone structures jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Asha stopped, surveying the area with practiced efficiency. "We camp here tonight," she announced. "The ruins have defense mechanisms that still function. Mostly, Kip questioned, rolling over a suspicious-looking stone that immediately tried to bite his wheel. "Oh, good. Mostly. That's reassuring." Asha began setting up a perimeter, placing small devices at strategic points that hummed with energy. Daniel watched her work, noting how her tail had relaxed into a gentle sway. She was in her element here, confident and competent. "Why do you hate humans?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself with the directness of the question. She paused in her work, her back to him. Her tail went completely still. "I do not hate humans." "But you hate me specifically." "I do not know you well enough to hate you," she resumed, placing the devices. "The council assigned me because I am expendable. My partner was killed 6 months ago by a Vurak Alpha. They think I am broken, useless for normal duties, perfect for babysitting an exile human who will probably die within a week." The casual brutality of her words hit harder than expected. Daniel had read his own file, knew what the academic community thought of him now. But hearing it reflected back from an alien perspective was different. "I was exiled too," he offered. "My mentor said my work was fiction, that I was seeing patterns that didn't exist, manufacturing data to support predetermined conclusions." "Were you?" "No, but I couldn't prove it without breaking protocols. So I came here, where protocols don't matter anymore." Asha turned to face him then, really looking at him for the second time. In the dying light of the binary sunset, her eyes seemed to glow. "What patterns did you think you saw?" Daniel hesitated. This was dangerous ground. But something about the way she asked, genuine curiosity beneath the careful neutrality, made him want to answer honestly. "I believe that every species has a universal emotional language, not words or sounds, but physical expressions that transcend cultural conditioning, micro-expressions in humans, chromatic changes in Altarians, and in Lurnari." He stopped himself, but her tail had already betrayed her interest, perking up slightly before she consciously lowered it again. "You studied our tails," she said. It wasn't a question. "Only in historical recordings, never in person. That would be criminal." "Yes." She activated the last device, and a faint shimmer appeared in the air, connecting all the points in a protective barrier. "Yet, here you are, trying very hard not to look at mine." The accusation hung between them. Daniel felt heat rise in his face. He had been looking, cataloging every movement despite himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's just your tail. It tells a different story than your words." "What story?" Her voice had gone dangerously quiet. Daniel knew he should stop, change the subject, preserve whatever fragile working relationship they had. But the researcher in him, the part that had thrown away a comfortable career for an unprovable theory, couldn't let it go. "When you saved me from the moss, your tail curved left? Concern? Maybe even worry. When I threw the flare to save you, it lifted. Surprise gratitude. And just now, when I mentioned patterns, it perked up with interest before you suppressed it." Asha was across the clearing before he could blink, her hand at his throat, pressing him against one of the ancient stones. Her eyes were slits of gold fire, and her tail was lashing with genuine anger now. "You know nothing," she hissed. "You watch and catalog like we are specimens. You think because you see movement, you understand meaning, but you are like a deaf person claiming to understand music because you can see the instruments move." She released him and stalked to the opposite side of the camp. Daniel rubbed his throat, knowing he had crossed a line but unable to fully regret it. This was the most real interaction they'd had all day. Kip rolled over to him, sensors flickering with what might have been concern. "Threat assessment, she could definitely kill you. Recommendation, stop talking about the tail." But as Daniel watched Asha set up her sleeping area, pointedly keeping her back to him, he noticed something she probably didn't mean for him to see. Her tail, despite her anger, had done something odd when she'd held him against the stone. For just a moment, it had trembled, not with rage or disgust, but with something else entirely. He thought about the words she'd used. Not that he was wrong about seeing patterns, but that he didn't understand their meaning. It wasn't a denial. It was a challenge. As darkness fell over the jungle and the bioluminescent plants began their nightly display, Daniel made a decision. He would continue to observe, to document, to try to understand, not just because it was his nature as a researcher, but because something told him Asha wanted him to. She could have requested a different assignment, could have let the carnivorous moss have him, could have left him to die when the plant predator attacked. But she hadn't, and her tail, in those moments of action, had told him why, even if he didn't fully understand the language yet. He pulled out his personal recorder, keeping his voice low as he made his first real entry, Day 1 on Thalrix. Initial observations suggest the Lurnari tail language is more complex than originally theorized. Subject shows conscious suppression of tail movements, indicating awareness and control. But micro-movements persist during high-stress situations. Further observation needed. Across the camp, Asha's ear swiveled toward him, though she didn't turn around. Her tail did something he hadn't seen before, a kind of spiral motion that ended with a flick. He had no idea what it meant, but he memorized it anyway. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, more of the jungle's lethal surprises. But it would also bring new opportunities to decode the mystery of Asha's dual communication. And maybe, if he was very careful and very lucky, he might survive long enough to prove that emotional language truly was universal, even if it cost him everything else he had left to lose. The first drops of Thalrix's nightly rain began to fall, each one glowing faintly as it passed through the shield barrier. The sound was almost musical, a percussion that mixed with the jungle's nocturnal chorus. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the alien symphony wash over him, and tried not to think about how Asha's tail had moved when she'd said he would probably die within a week. It had curved upward at the tip, just slightly. He was almost certain that meant she was lying. The morning came too soon, heralded by a cacophony of alien bird calls that sounded like metal scraping against glass. Daniel hadn't slept well, his mind replaying the tremor in Asha's tail when she'd held him against the stone. He'd spent half the night creating mental categories, trying to build a framework for understanding what he was seeing. Asha was already awake, checking the perimeter devices with methodical precision. Her tail hung in what he was beginning to recognize as her default position, low, but not dragging, curved slightly inward, guarded, controlled. "We move in 10 minutes, she said, without looking at him. "The crystalline groves are 3 hours north. Longer if you continue to stumble into every predator on this planet." Kip wheeled over to Daniel, his damaged optical sensor flickering more than usual. "Good morning to you too, Sunshine. I've run diagnostics on yesterday's encounters. We have a survival probability of approximately 32% if this pattern continues." "Your robot talks too much," Asha commented, deactivating the shield perimeter. "He grows on you," Daniel replied, stuffing his sleeping gear into his pack. He caught a glimpse of Asha's tail doing a small flip motion. Amusement, disbelief. He mentally filed it under "requires more data." The jungle seemed different in daylight, though no less dangerous. The bioluminescent moss had faded to a dull gray, but other plants had awakened, their leaves tracking the movement of Thalrix's binary suns across the purple-tinged sky. Daniel found himself using his datapad's reflective screen to observe Asha without directly looking at her, angling it just enough to catch her movements in the dark surface. It was during their first water break that he began to see patterns emerging. When Asha scanned the canopy for threats, her tail went rigid and horizontal, like a compass needle pointing toward potential danger. When she determined the area was safe, it relaxed into a gentle S-curve. When she watched him fumble with his water purification tablets, the tip twitched in what he was becoming certain was suppressed laughter. "You're documenting something," she said suddenly, making him nearly drop his datapad. "Just notes on the flora," he lied, his fingers automatically saving the file he'd labeled Asha's lexicon under several layers of encryption. Her golden eyes narrowed, but she didn't pursue it. Instead, she pointed to a cluster of crystalline formations growing from a massive tree trunk. "Early samples. The ones we seek are deeper in, but you can begin your analysis here." Daniel approached the crystals carefully, genuinely fascinated despite his divided attention. They were unlike anything in the database, seeming to pulse with an inner light that had nothing to do with bioluminescence. When he touched one with his sampling tool, it resonated with a clear, almost musical tone. "They sing," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "Everything on Thalrix communicates," Asha replied. "Plants, animals, the planet itself. Only humans need words for everything." It was the longest statement she'd made that wasn't a warning or instruction. Daniel looked at her reflection in his datapad screen. Her tail was doing something new, a gentle swaying motion while the tip traced small circles. He labeled it contemplative in his mental notes. They were 2 hours into the jungle when Kip decided to malfunction spectacularly. It started with his speaker system crackling, then suddenly blaring an alarm that sounded exactly like a Terran cat's yowl, amplified to ear-splitting levels. Asha spun around so fast she was a blur, her tail shooting straight up with every hair standing on end. Her pupils had contracted to barely visible slits, and for a moment, she looked absolutely feral. "Shut it off!" she snarled, her hands pressed against her ears. Daniel frantically jabbed at Kip's manual override, but the robot continued its feline serenade, now cycling through what seemed to be every cat sound in his corrupted database. Meows, hisses, purrs that sounded like a ground car engine. Finally, Daniel resorted to hitting Kip with his boot. The sound cut off abruptly, leaving them in a silence that felt almost physical. Asha was breathing hard, her tail still bristled but slowly settling. "What was that?" "I have no idea, Kip. Diagnostic report." The robot's sensor flickered. "Audio drivers corrupted? Possibly from yesterday's coolant discharge. I appear to have defaulted to the Earth Fauna Sound Library. Subcategory Felis catus." Daniel couldn't help it. He laughed. The absurdity of it. The look of absolute shock on Asha's face. Kip's matter-of-fact delivery of the ridiculous malfunction. His laughter echoed through the jungle, probably attracting every predator in a kilometer radius. But he couldn't stop. And then he saw it. Asha's tail was vibrating, not trembling with anger or fear, but a rapid, almost invisible vibration while the tip curved upward. She was fighting not to laugh. "You find this amusing?" she asked, trying to sound stern. "Your face," Daniel managed between gasps. "You looked like someone had dumped ice water on you." "I did not expect your defective robot to speak ancient Lernari." She moved closer, examining Kip with interest. "Those sounds, they are from Earth cats." "Yes, they're domestic animals, pets." "Pets," she repeated the word carefully. "You keep small predators for companionship. When you put it that way, it sounds weird." Her tail did the vibrating motion again, stronger this time. "Humans are weird." It was the first time she'd said something about humans that wasn't tinged with disdain or indifference. Daniel felt something shift between them, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built. They continued through the jungle, and Daniel noticed Asha had stopped trying so hard to keep her back to him. She still didn't make direct eye contact often, but she no longer actively avoided his presence. When they encountered a stream that needed crossing, she automatically reached back to steady him on the slippery rocks. Her tail, he noted in his reflection, watching, curved slightly toward him during the crossing. Protective, concerned. The crystalline grove, when they finally reached it, took Daniel's breath away. Hundreds of formations sprouted from the ground and trees, each one unique in color and shape. When the wind moved through them, they created a harmony that was almost hypnotic. But it was the way they responded to Asha that truly captivated him. As she walked among them, the crystals near her brightened, their tones shifting to complement each other like an orchestral arrangement. When she touched one, others nearby resonated in response, creating waves of sound and light that rippled outward. "They recognize you," Daniel said, recording everything with his equipment. "They recognize life," Asha corrected. But when she moved her hand over a particularly large cluster, the resulting melody was clearly unique to her. Each being creates a different song. Daniel approached a crystal formation, and the tone it produced was different indeed, lower, more uncertain. But when he and Asha stood near the same cluster, the harmony that resulted was unexpectedly beautiful. Two distinct melodies that somehow complemented each other. "Interesting," Asha murmured, and her tail did something complex, a spiral that ended with a quick flick to the left. He had no idea what it meant, but he memorized it anyway. They spent hours in the grove, Daniel collecting samples and data, while Asha stood guard. But he noticed she was also listening to the crystals, sometimes touching ones that seemed to call to her. During one such moment, when she thought he was absorbed in his work, he saw her tail droop, the tip dragging in the luminescent moss. Sadness, raw and unguarded. "Your partner," Daniel said quietly, not looking up from his samples. "They like this place." Asha went very still. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. "Marcus found it first," she finally said. "He said the crystals sang the story of the planet, said if we listened long enough, we could understand everything." Marcus. She'd used a name, made it personal. Daniel carefully continued his work, not wanting to break whatever had prompted this revelation. "He was killed here," Daniel asked gently. "Near here. The Vurak Alpha hunts this territory. Marcus was... He thought he could communicate with it. Thought the crystals would help translate." Her tail lashed once, sharp with anger and grief. "He was wrong." Daniel stood slowly, turning to face her, but keeping his gaze slightly averted, trying to be respectful. "I'm sorry. Losing someone like that." You lost someone too, she said. It wasn't a question. Your mentor, Dr. Morn. Not the same, he's still alive. He just killed my career instead of my body. Sometimes that's worse. Her tail had returned to its neutral position, but there was something different about her posture, less rigid. The betrayal from someone you trusted. They stood there in the singing grove, surrounded by alien beauty and the weight of their respective losses. Daniel wanted to say something comforting, but he knew words would be inadequate. Instead, he returned to his work, giving her space while staying close enough that she wasn't alone with her memories. As the day wore on, Asha's lexicon grew more detailed. He'd identified at least 15 distinct tail positions, though he suspected there were subtle variations that created entirely different meanings. The horizontal meant alert, but angled up was aggressive alert, while angled down was cautious alert. The S-curve was relaxation, but the depth of the curves indicated different levels of comfort. The spiral motion seemed connected to complex thoughts or confusion. Late in the afternoon, as they prepared to head back, Asha suddenly froze. Her tail went rigid, but not in the usual alert position. It was pressed tight against her leg, trembling. "Run," she whispered. Daniel didn't question. He grabbed his pack and followed as she sprinted through the crystals, their harmonious songs turning discordant with the sudden movement. Behind them, he heard something big moving through the grove, crystals shattering with musical screams. The Vurak Alpha was exactly as terrifying as the report suggested. Twice the size of an earth bear, but moving with feline grace. Its 6 eyes fixed on them with predatory focus. Its hide was covered in crystalline growths, as if it had absorbed the grove's formations into its own body. When it roared, the sound harmonized with the breaking crystals, creating a nightmarish symphony. They ran, but it was gaining. Asha suddenly shoved Daniel to the left, diving right herself. The creature's claws passed through the space between them, close enough that Daniel felt the wind of their passage. They regrouped, running parallel to each other with the Vurak Alpha, having to choose which prey to follow. It chose Asha. No. Daniel skidded to a stop, frantically digging in his pack for anything useful. His fingers closed on his emergency flares, the same type that had worked on the plant creature. But the Vurak Alpha was no plant. It was an apex predator that had killed Asha's partner, and flares wouldn't stop it. But they might distract it. Daniel activated 3 flares at once and threw them in different directions, creating multiple light sources. The Vurak Alpha's 6 eyes tried to track them all at once, its hunt instinct momentarily confused. Asha used the distraction to circle back, her energy blade humming to life. "Get to the trees," she shouted at Daniel. "Not leaving you. This is not your fight." But Daniel was already moving, not away but perpendicular to the creature, gathering crystals that had broken during the chase. He remembered how they'd resonated with different frequencies for different beings. If he could create enough chaos in the harmonics, he struck the crystals together, creating a discordant crash of sound. The Vurak Alpha winced, its crystalline hide resonating painfully with the noise. Daniel kept it up, moving constantly to avoid being an easy target, while Asha struck at the creature's legs with her blade. Together, they were actually driving it back. Then Kip, wonderful, malfunctioning Kip, decided to help. The robot came wheeling into the clearing at top speed, his speaker blaring that same corrupted cat yowl from earlier. But, to the Vurak Alpha, the sound meant something very different. Its 6 eyes went wide, and it actually took a step backward. "It's a mating challenge," Asha gasped, understanding immediately. "It thinks there's another alpha." Daniel didn't waste the opportunity. He grabbed more crystals, these ones still connected to their roots, and struck them in the pattern he'd heard when Asha first entered the grove. Her unique harmonic signature, amplified and repeated. The Vurak Alpha was surrounded now by confusing sensory input, the false mating challenge. Asha's harmonic signature, coming from multiple directions, and the painful discord of shattered crystals. It made a sound somewhere between a roar and a whine, then retreated into the deeper jungle, its 6 eyes promising this wasn't over. They stood there in the aftermath, breathing hard, surrounded by broken crystals and fading flare light. Asha's tail was doing something Daniel had never seen before, a rapid figure-8 pattern, while puffed to nearly double its size. "Adrenaline," she said, noticing his reflection, watching in a crystal shard. "The tail does that when we survive something we shouldn't have." "You could have run when it focused on me," Daniel said. "You could have run when it chased me," she countered. They looked at each other then. Really looked. And Daniel saw something shift in her golden eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. As they made their way back to camp in the growing darkness, Asha didn't maintain her usual distance. When difficult terrain required careful navigation, she automatically reached back to guide him. Once, when he stumbled, she caught his arm and held it perhaps a moment longer than necessary. But it was what happened when they finally reached the safety of their shielded camp that Daniel would remember most from that day. Asha was exhausted, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. She sat by their small fire, trying to clean a cut on her shoulder that her blade's proximity had cauterized, but left painful. Daniel wordlessly handed her his medical kit, then surprised them both by taking over the cleaning himself when she struggled to reach the wound properly. His fingers were gentle but efficient, and Asha held perfectly still. Her tail, though, told a different story. It curled and uncurled in a pattern he hadn't documented yet, something rhythmic and almost hypnotic. "Thank you," she said when he finished. "For the crystals. That was clever. Kip deserves the credit. His malfunction saved us. I categorically refuse credit for my audio driver failure," Kip announced from where he was running self-diagnostics. "Though I am downloading more EarthCat sounds for future emergencies." That startled a laugh out of Asha. A real one. And her tail did that vibrating motion again. Daniel realized with sudden clarity that it was joy. Pure, simple joy. He'd been documenting her tail language all day, but this was the first time he'd seen genuine happiness. He handed her one of his precious energy rations. The high-calorie bars that tasted terrible, but could keep a human going for days. She took it without protest, too tired to maintain her walls. "Your partner," she said after a while. "This Dr. Morn. What did he do to you?" Daniel stared into the fire, remembering. "He was my advisor, my mentor. I trusted him with everything. When I started seeing patterns in cross-species emotional expression, he encouraged me, said it was groundbreaking. Then, when I was ready to publish, he submitted a review stating I'd fabricated data, said my human bias was making me see connections that didn't exist. My funding was cut, my position terminated. No journal would even look at my work after that. But you still believe in it. I'm here. Aren't I watching your tail like a creep because I can't help seeing patterns?" Asha's tail lifted slightly. "Just the tip. You're not a creep, you're just persistent." "Stubborn, you mean?" "That too." She finished the energy bar, making a face at the taste. "Your theory, about universal emotional language. You think all species share something fundamental. I think consciousness creates certain inevitable patterns. Fear, joy, love, grief. They might look different, but the underlying architecture is the same, like how water always flows downhill, even on different planets. And my tail proves this?" Daniel met her eyes. "Your tail speaks when you won't. It tells the truth when words lie. It's exactly what my theory predicted. A secondary communication system that bypasses conscious control in moments of genuine emotion." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, Deliberately, she let her tail move through a series of positions: alert, curious, amused, sad, and finally something new, a gentle wave that seemed to encompass all the others. "What does that mean?" Daniel asked, mesmerized. "It means," Asha said, standing and moving toward her sleeping area, "that tomorrow I'll teach you to read it properly. If you're going to study me like a specimen, you might as well get the data right." Daniel sat by the dying fire long after she'd gone to sleep, his mind racing. She was offering to teach him, to let him in. It was more than he'd dared hope for. As he finally prepared for sleep himself, he made one last entry in his lexicon: tail position 47 slow wave, incorporating multiple emotional states. Possible meaning: trust. In her sleeping area, Asha's ear twitched toward him, and her tail, just visible in the firelight, lifted once in what he was almost certain was confirmation. The message arrived at dawn, cutting through the morning mist with the harsh buzz of Daniel's emergency communicator. He hadn't heard that particular tone in 3 years, not since his exile began. The sound made his stomach drop even before he read the contents. Priority transmission. Origin Dr. Selric Morn, Xenobiology Council. Message follows. Daniel sat up in his sleeping bag, his movement alerting Asha, who was already awake, practicing combat forms in the early light. Her tail immediately shifted to alert position, responding to his sudden tension. "What is it?" she asked, her hand moving instinctively to her blade. Daniel read the message aloud, his voice flat. "Daniel, preliminary reports indicate you've discovered bioluminescent organisms with significant medical applications. The Council requires immediate documentation of all findings. Commercial development rights are already being negotiated. Do not pursue any research outside standard botanical parameters. Your reinstatement depends on compliance. Morn." The datapad creaked in Daniel's grip. After 3 years of silence, 3 years of being academically dead, Morn contacted him only when there was profit to be made. Asha moved closer, reading the message over his shoulder. Her proximity was still new enough to be notable. A week ago, she would have maintained her distance. "This Dr. Morn, he wants the crystal moss for money. The moss, the crystals, anything he can patent and sell." Daniel's jaw clenched. "He destroyed my career over a theory about emotional communication, called it worthless fantasy. But the moment there's potential profit in my exile work, suddenly I exist again." Her tail did something he'd cataloged as contemplative displeasure, a slow weave with periodic sharp flicks. "You will comply. I have to send something. If I don't, they'll send a retrieval team. But I can control what information I share." He looked at her, an idea forming. "The moss has different properties depending on how it's harvested. Right? You mentioned that before." "Yes. Taken violently, it produces toxins. Harvested with proper respect, it provides medicine." Her golden eyes narrowed with understanding. "You plan to mislead him. I plan to give him exactly what he asks for. Standard botanical parameters. Nothing about the consciousness-responsive aspects. Nothing about the need for ethical harvesting. Let him try to commercialize it without understanding it." Asha's tail curved in what he now knew was approval, mixed with amusement. "Devious. I like it." They spent the morning documenting the moss, but only its surface properties. Daniel carefully omitted any mention of how it responded to emotional states, how its medicinal properties were linked to the harvester's intentions, how the Lurnari had cultivated a symbiotic relationship with it over generations. The report was technically accurate, but functionally useless. "Your mentor will not be pleased when he discovers the deception," Asha observed, watching him encrypt the files. "By then, hopefully, I'll have documented something he can't dismiss or steal." Daniel glanced at his datapad, where his real research lived. the growing lexicon of tail language that was proving his theories correct. They were preparing to venture deeper into the jungle when the weather turned. Thalrix's magnetic storms were legendary, but experiencing one was different from reading about it. The air itself seemed to vibrate, making Daniel's teeth ache. Electronic equipment began sparking randomly. Kip shut down entirely, his circuits overwhelmed. "We need shelter," Asha said, her fur standing on end from the static charge. "The caves! Quickly!" She led them through increasingly violent winds to a series of caves carved into a cliff face. Inside, the walls were lined with a different type of crystal, these ones dark and non-responsive to touch. The storm's electromagnetic fury couldn't penetrate here, though they could hear it raging outside. "We wait," Asha said, settling against a wall. "These storms can last hours or days." Daniel used the forced downtime to review his notes, cross-referencing tail positions with contexts and emotional states. Asha watched him work, her tail in a relaxed curve he associated with curiosity. "Show me what you have learned," she said suddenly. Daniel hesitated, then pulled up his files, displaying them on his datapad. "I've identified 43 distinct positions so far, with variations based on speed and combined movements. The horizontal positions relate to environmental awareness. Curves indicate emotional states. Spirals seem to be cognitive processes." "Wrong," Asha interrupted, but her tail was doing the amused vibration. "You see the shapes, but not the language. Watch." She stood and deliberately moved her tail through a series of positions. "This is what you call alert horizontal. But see the angle. 5 degrees up means potential threat. 5 degrees down means notable but safe. The speed of movement to the position matters too. Fast is immediate danger. Slow is worth watching." For the next hour, she taught him properly, correcting his assumptions and adding layers of meaning he'd missed. It was like learning that what he'd thought was an alphabet was actually an entire language with grammar, syntax, and poetry. "Why are you teaching me this?" Daniel asked finally. "This is private, sacred to your people." Asha was quiet for a moment, her tail still. "Because you see us as people, not specimens. Your notes, they include context, emotion, the why behind the movement. The Council thinks we are animals pretending at civilization. You document us as complex beings with complex feelings." Before Daniel could respond, the storm's intensity suddenly spiked. The cave mouth lit up with electromagnetic discharge that looked like frozen lightning. The very air hummed with power, and Daniel felt his hair standing on end despite the cave's shielding. Then they heard it a roar that cut through even the storm's fury. "The Vurak Alpha," Asha breathed, her tail going rigid. "It hunts during storms. The electromagnetic interference masks its approach." The creature appeared at the cave mouth, its 6 eyes glowing with reflected lightning. The crystals embedded in its hide were reacting to the storm, creating an aurora effect across its body. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Back of the cave," Asha ordered, pushing Daniel behind her. But the Vurak Alpha wasn't attacking. It stood at the threshold, rain streaming off its crystalline armor, making sounds Daniel had never heard before. Not roars or growls, but something almost plaintive. "It's in pain," Daniel realized. "The storm, the electromagnetic field. It's causing the crystals in its body to resonate incorrectly." Asha's grip on her blade loosened slightly. Marcus thought the same thing, right before it killed him. But Daniel was already moving. Not toward the creature, but to his pack. The moss samples he'd collected, the ones with healing properties when harvested correctly. He'd taken them with gratitude, with respect, the way Asha had shown him. "Daniel, no," Asha warned, but he was already approaching the cave mouth. The Vurak Alpha's 6 eyes fixed on him, and for a moment, Daniel was certain he was about to die. Then He held up the glowing moss, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. The creature's nostrils flared, scenting the medicine. "The crystal's in your body," Daniel said, knowing it couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey meaning. "They're out of harmony. This might help." He placed the moss on a flat stone and stepped back. The Vurak Alpha watched him, then slowly, cautiously, extended its massive head to investigate. When it consumed the moss, the effect was immediate. The chaotic aurora across its body began to stabilize, the discordant resonance becoming something more musical. The creature looked at Daniel for a long moment, intelligence clear in its 6 eyes. Then it turned and vanished into the storm, leaving them unharmed. Asha stood frozen, her tail cycling through positions so quickly Daniel couldn't read them all. Shock, fear, amazement, and something else, something deeper. "You fed medicine to the thing that killed Marcus," she said, her voice strange. "It wasn't evil," Daniel replied, still shaking from the encounter. "Just in pain. The crystals that grew into its body, they're not natural. Someone or something did that to it." Asha's blade clattered to the cave floor. She sat down hard, her tail wrapping around her knees in what Daniel recognized as a self-comforting gesture. "Marcus would have loved you," she said quietly. "He believed the same thing. That understanding could replace violence. I called him naive, said he was too trusting." Her voice broke slightly. "The night he died, we argued. I wanted him to stay in camp, but he insisted on trying to make contact with the Vurak. Our last words were angry ones." Daniel sat beside her, careful not to touch, but close enough to offer presence. He was right, though. Connection was possible. He just didn't have all the pieces. "Neither did you, but you tried anyway." "I had something he didn't," Daniel said. "I had you. Your knowledge of the moss, how to harvest it properly. Without that, I would have failed too." Asha's tail uncurled slightly, brushing against his leg for just a moment. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact that wasn't about survival. The storm raged for 6 more hours. They talked through most of it, Asha sharing stories of Marcus and their life together, Daniel describing his fall from academic grace in more detail. She taught him that tail touches had their own vocabulary, separate from visual positions. A brush to the left meant gratitude. To the right meant apology. A tap was emphasis. A sustained touch was comfort or affection. "Your lexicon," she said as the storm finally began to weaken. "It needs a new category." "What category?" She moved her tail in a pattern he'd never seen before. Complex and flowing like water. "Connection beyond species. What you did today. What Marcus believed in. There should be a word for that." Daniel added it to his database, labeling it simply Hope. As they prepared to leave the cave, Asha stopped him with a hand on his arm. "The message from your mentor. There's something you should know. The Council has been monitoring all off-world botanical research for years. They know about the consciousness-responsive properties. They're specifically looking for organisms that can be weaponized." Daniel's blood went cold. "Weaponized how?" "Biological weapons that respond to emotional states. Imagine a pathogen that only activates when the target feels fear, or a plant that becomes toxic in the presence of certain thought patterns." "That's monstrous. That's profit." Her tail lashed with disgust. "Your Dr. Morn isn't just greedy. He's dangerous." They emerged from the cave to find the jungle transformed. The storm had brought out bioluminescent organisms Daniel had never seen before, turning the forest into a galaxy of living lights. It was breathtaking. But his mind was elsewhere, processing the implications of Asha's revelation. "We need to be careful," he said. "If Morn suspects I'm withholding information, then we give him what he wants." Asha interrupted, her tail taking on a position he recognized as determined planning. But we give it to him our way. Document everything. Daniel. Not just my tale, but all of it. The crystals, the moss, the Vurak, how it all connects. Build a record that can't be suppressed or stolen. Why does this matter to you? She looked at him, her golden eyes fierce. Because Marcus died believing in something everyone said was impossible. You just proved him right. That's worth protecting. They made their way back through the glowing jungle, alert for dangers, but somehow less afraid than before. The Vurak Alpha was still out there, but it was no longer just a monster. The moss was still valuable, but its true worth wasn't commercial. And Asha's tale, which had started as a forbidden mystery, was becoming a bridge between worlds. That night, as they reached a new camping spot, Daniel received another message from Morn. This one was less formal, more threatening. Your preliminary report was received but deemed insufficient. A retrieval team will arrive in 3 days to assist with proper documentation. Your cooperation is expected. 3 days, Daniel muttered. Not much time. Asha's tail curved into what he now knew was resolute confidence. Then we work fast, tomorrow. I show you the deep groves, where the oldest crystals grow. There are harmonics there that no human has recorded. Why would you do that? Because, she said, her tail brushing his hand in the gesture of trust. Your mentor thinks he knows what power is, but real power isn't taking what you want. It's understanding what you're given. Marcus knew that. You know that. It's time Dr. Morn learned it too. As Daniel settled in for sleep, he thought about the Vurak Alpha's eyes, intelligent and pained. About Asha's tale speaking truths her voice couldn't. About Marcus, who died trying to build bridges. His lexicon was growing beyond simple documentation. It was becoming proof that connection was possible, that understanding could transcend species, that his theories weren't fantasy, but fundamental truth. 3 days to document everything. 3 days to build a defense against Morn's exploitation. 3 days to prove that emotional communication was the key to everything. He looked at Asha, who was watching the stars through the canopy. Her tail relaxed in perfect contentment. She caught his glance and deliberately moved her tail through the pattern she'd taught him earlier, connection beyond species. 3 days might just be enough. The deep caves were unlike anything Daniel had documented before. As Asha led him through a passage that required crawling on their bellies, the walls began to pulse with a bioluminescence that responded to their heartbeats. Each pulse sent waves of color through crystalline veins in the rock, creating a living map of their progress. The Lurnari believe these caves are conscious, Asha said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. That they remember everyone who passes through. They emerged into a vast chamber, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with suspended spores. Daniel's atmospheric scanner immediately began flashing warnings. Unknown neurotoxic compounds. Potentially hallucinogenic. Concentration increasing with depth. We need masks, Daniel said, reaching for his emergency kit. No. Asha stopped him. The spores are part of it. They show truth, even truths we hide from ourselves. But they're dangerous if you fight them. You must let them in, acknowledge what they show, or they become poison. Daniel hesitated. 3 days to document everything. And now Asha was asking him to deliberately inhale neurotoxins. But her tail was in the position he'd learned meant absolute certainty, with the subtle curl that indicated personal experience. You've done this before. With Marcus. It's how the Lurnari choose their life partners. The spores strip away pretense. You see each other completely. Her tail drooped slightly. It's how I knew he truly believed in peace with all creatures, and how he knew I was afraid of his optimism. Daniel made his decision, tucking the mask away. They moved deeper into the chamber, and immediately he felt the spores taking effect. The world took on a crystalline clarity, every detail impossibly sharp. He could see the individual facets of each crystal, the way light bent through them, creating patterns that seemed to spell out words in languages he didn't know. But more than that, he could see Asha, not just her physical form, but layers of emotion radiating from her like heat shimmer. Grief, for Marcus, hung around her in deep purple waves. Fear, bright yellow, spiking whenever she looked at Daniel. And underneath it all, a warm golden glow that pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. Hope affection, something his academic mind couldn't quite categorize. "You're glowing," Asha said, and he realized she was seeing him the same way. Blue and silver, like deep water under moonlight. But there are cracks, dark lines running through, old wounds that never healed properly. The spores intensified, and suddenly Daniel was speaking without conscious thought. Words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "I document everything because I'm terrified of being wrong again. When I was 12, I had a brother, younger, autistic. Everyone said he couldn't communicate, couldn't connect. But I saw patterns in how he moved, how he arranged his toys, how he hummed. I created a whole system, a language I thought we shared. I told everyone he was talking to me, that I understood him. My parents were so happy. They brought in specialists. And then one day, the lead specialist proved I was wrong. I was just seeing patterns that weren't there, projecting meaning onto randomness. My brother wasn't communicating. He was just moving. My parents never looked at me the same way, like I was either a liar or delusional. Dr. Morn knew this. He knew, and he used the same words the specialist did when he destroyed my career. Seeing patterns that don't exist." The confession left him gasping, tears he didn't know he was crying streaming down his face. Through the spore-enhanced vision, he saw Asha's tail moving in a pattern he'd never documented before. It was complex, beautiful, like a dance. She moved closer, and her tail wrapped around his wrist, the fur soft against his skin. "The patterns were real," she said softly. "Maybe not language as you understood it, but real nonetheless. Connection doesn't always look like we expect." The spores swirled thicker, and now Daniel found himself observing Asha's tail with the supernatural clarity the neurotoxins provided. Every movement wasn't just emotional expression. It was memory, story, entire conversations compressed into gesture. He saw her history written in the way she moved the joy of meeting Marcus, the slow bloom of love, the moment she knew he would die trying to prove his theories, the instant the Vurak's claws found him, the months of emptiness after. "You blame yourself," Daniel said, the words pulled from him by the spore's truth-compelling effect. "You think if you'd been less afraid, more supportive, he'd still be alive." "Stop," Asha whispered, but her tail was saying something else entirely, curling and uncurling in what he now understood was desperate agreement. "And you're afraid it's happening again. With me. That's why you're helping me document everything so quickly. You think I'm going to die too." Asha's control shattered. Her tail lashed wildly, and she pressed her hands against her eyes. "The spores show too much. We should leave." But Daniel couldn't stop. The neurotoxins had unlocked something in his brain, a pattern recognition overdrive that let him see the full structure of tail language all at once. It wasn't just emotional expression or communication. It was mathematics, poetry, music, and memory all woven together. Every Lurnari tale told the complete story of its owner's life, constantly writing and rewriting itself with each experience. "Your tale," he gasped. "When you held me against the stone that first night, it wasn't trembling with anger. It was remembering. The last time you touched someone with anger was Marcus, the night he died. You were reliving that moment, terrified of repeating it." "Stop," Asha's voice cracked. "You're not supposed to see that much. No one is supposed to see that much. But the spores weren't done with either of them. The chamber around them began to shift, the crystals reflecting not light, but memories. Daniel saw himself through Asha's eyes, stumbling, fragile, absurdly determined. He saw the moment he threw the flare to save her from the plant creature. How his face looked fierce despite his terror. He saw himself feeding medicine to the Vurak Alpha. And in that reflection, he looked exactly like Marcus. That same impossible faith and connection. And then, he saw what Asha had been hiding, even from herself. The way her tail moved when she watched him work, mirroring his hand gestures unconsciously. The careful distance she maintained that had nothing to do with professional duty, and everything to do with fear of feeling again. The moment during the storm when she decided that if he was going to die, she didn't want him to die alone. "I'm falling in love with you," Daniel heard himself say, the spores stripping away his ability to hide behind academic observation. "That's why I can't stop watching your tail. Not for science. For you." The chamber spun. The spore concentration was becoming dangerous, their truth-telling transforming into something more chaotic. Daniel started seeing multiple versions of Asha, each one showing a different emotional state. Her tail split into dozens of phantom tails, each moving through different patterns, showing every possible response to his confession. "We need to move," Asha said, grabbing his hand. "Deeper exposure causes permanent neural changes. Some Lurnari never leave these caves, lost in infinite truth." They stumbled toward the exit, but the spores followed them, a cloud of glowing particles that whispered secrets. Daniel heard his own voice cataloging tail positions, but now each position came with emotional echoes. He felt what Asha felt when her tail curved in contentment, experienced her grief when it drooped, her joy when it vibrated. "This is what Marcus felt," Asha gasped as they crawled back through the narrow passage. "He said the spores showed him how to communicate with everything. But the price is feeling everything too." They burst out of the cave system into harsh daylight. Daniel immediately vomited, his body rejecting the toxic overload. Asha collapsed beside him, her fur matted with sweat, her tail twitching through random patterns as her nervous system reset. "I'm sorry," Daniel managed between heaves. "I shouldn't have. The things I said were true," Asha finished. "The spores don't lie. They can't." They sat in silence as the neurotoxins slowly cleared from their systems. The hypersensitivity faded, but the memories of what they'd seen and said remained crystal clear. Daniel's datapad had been recording the entire time, capturing not just their words but the visual phenomena. Asha's tail movements. Everything. "Delete it," Asha said, noticing the recording indicator. "What?" "Delete it. What happened in there? It's not data. It's not for your lexicon. It's private," Daniel finished. "I know, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking clearly." But as he moved to delete the file, Asha's tail touched his hand. "Wait. Save it. Encrypt it. Hide it. But save it. Someday, when this is all over, when your mentor is dealt with and my grief has faded more, I want to remember this moment. The moment someone saw all of me and didn't run." Daniel secured the file under multiple layers of encryption, then looked at Asha. Really looked at her, without the pretense of scientific observation. "You saw all of me too, and you're still here." "Barely," she said. But her tail curved in the pattern he now knew meant gentle teasing. "You humans are complicated. All those words to say things that should be simple." Before Daniel could respond, his communicator buzzed. Emergency priority. Again. But this time, it wasn't from Morn. The message was from Kip, who they'd left at the main camp to charge his batteries. The robot's text was characteristically pessimistic, but unusually urgent. "Large ship approaching. Not standard retrieval team configuration. Military escort detected. Estimate arrival in 18 hours. Also, I found something in the deleted communications cache. Your mentor has been here before. 3 years ago. The week before Marcus died. Daniel's blood went cold. He looked at Asha, whose tail had gone completely rigid. Morn was here when Marcus died. Daniel's fingers flew over his datapad, accessing deeper records, cross-referencing dates and locations. What he found made him sick all over again, and this time, it had nothing to do with spores. Preliminary Xenobiology Survey, classified under military protocols. He read, Focus on weaponization potential of crystalline organisms. Local fauna deemed expendable for testing purposes. Project lead, Dr. Selric Morn. Asha was on her feet, her blade humming to life. He killed Marcus, not the Vurak. Morn killed him. We don't know that for certain. The crystals in the Vurak's body. You said they weren't natural. Someone did that to it. Your mentor turned it into a weapon and then set it loose to test the results. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Morn hadn't just destroyed Daniel's career out of professional jealousy. He'd been clearing potential witnesses to his illegal experiments. And now, he was coming back to clean up loose ends. 18 hours, Daniel muttered. We need proof. Real evidence that can't be suppressed. We need the Vurak, Asha said, her tail now moving in what Daniel recognized as hunting mode. If the crystals were implanted, there will be scarring, surgical marks. And if I'm right about the timing, the creature's attacks only started after Morn's visit. They ran back toward the Crystal Grove, where they'd last seen the Vurak Alpha. The sun was beginning to set, painting everything in shades of orange and red that made the bioluminescent plants look like they were on fire. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, strategies, ways to expose Morn that wouldn't just result in another burial of evidence. They found the Vurak Alpha near the grove, lying in a clearing. At first, Daniel thought it was dead. But then, he saw the shallow rise and fall of its breathing. The creature's 6 eyes tracked their approach, but it made no move to attack. The moss helped temporarily, Daniel realized. But whatever Morn did to it, the damage is progressive. It's dying. Asha approached slowly, her blade deactivated. Her tail in the submission posture she'd taught Daniel meant no threat. The Vurak watched her, intelligence and pain clear in its multiple eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered to it. I blamed you for Marcus, but you were a victim too. The creature allowed them to examine it. The surgical scars were hidden beneath its fur, but they were there. Precise incisions where the crystals had been implanted, forced to grow into its nervous system. Daniel documented everything, his hands shaking with rage. He turned a peaceful creature into a killer, Daniel said, then used it to eliminate someone who might have exposed his experiments. The Vurak made a sound, soft and mournful. It lifted one massive paw toward Asha, who, after a moment's hesitation, took it. The creature's tail, so different from a Lurnari's but still expressive, curled once in what looked like apology. We'll stop him, Asha promised it. We'll make sure everyone knows what he did. They spent the next hours gathering evidence, documentation of the surgical sites, samples of the unnaturally modified crystals, recordings of the Vurak's brain patterns showing the artificial aggression triggers Morn had implanted. Daniel compiled it all into an encrypted package, ready to transmit to every scientific database and news outlet the moment Morn arrived. But as dawn approached, bringing Morn's arrival ever closer, Asha raised a concern that had been nagging at Daniel too. He won't come himself. He'll send others, keep his hands clean, and if we transmit this data, he'll claim it's fabricated, just like he did with your original research. Daniel knew she was right. They needed something more, something that would force Morn to reveal himself. He looked at the dying Vurak, at Asha whose tail was moving through patterns of grief and determination, at the crystal grove that sang with the memory of Marcus's death. "We give him what he wants," Daniel said suddenly. "We tell him we found something incredible, something he has to see for himself, something worth more than weapons." "What could be worth more to him than weapons?" Daniel pulled up his recording from the spore cave, the one he'd encrypted. "Control. Perfect. Unbreakable control. We tell him the spores can be modified to make subjects completely compliant. Their every thought visible. Their every emotion manageable. We tell him we've tested it on ourselves and it works." Asha's tail went through several rapid positions before settling on understanding. "We bait him with his own fantasy. But the spores don't work that way. They reveal truth, not create slavery. He doesn't know that. And by the time he figures it out, he'll have breathed them in himself. He'll confess everything, just like we did. That's assuming we survive that long. The military escort won't hesitate to kill us once they have what they want." Daniel looked at the Vurak Alpha, an idea forming. "Unless we have backup, they don't expect." The next hours were spent in preparation. They moved the weakened Vurak to the cave system, where the spores might actually help stabilize its condition. Asha taught Daniel combat patterns, ways to use the crystal's resonance as a weapon. Kip was programmed with new audio files, not just cat sounds but recordings of multiple Vurak calls, creating the illusion of a pack. And through it all, Daniel found himself watching Asha's tale with new understanding. The spores had shown him the full depth of the language, but more than that, they'd shown him the person behind it. Every movement was a story, a feeling, a moment of connection that transcended species boundaries. As the ship's arrival grew imminent, Asha did something unexpected. She took Daniel's hand and guided it to her tail, letting him feel the movement as she created a pattern. "This means trust beyond reason," she said. "Marcus taught it to me. I'm teaching it to you. Whatever happens next, remember this feeling." The rumble of engines filled the air. Morn was coming. Daniel saved his final recording, encrypting it with a dead man's switch that would transmit everything if he didn't input a code every hour. Then he looked at Asha, whose tail was now in full battle readiness, and felt a strange calm. "Ready?" "No," she said, but her tail curved in what he knew meant absolute determination. "But that's never stopped us before." They walked out to meet their fate, carrying the truth like a weapon, hope like armor, and the memory of Marcus like a banner. The Vurak Alpha watched from the shadows, 6 eyes gleaming with promised vengeance. The betrayal Daniel had experienced from Morn 3 years ago had led him here, to this moment. But now he wasn't alone. He had Asha, whose tale spoke volumes of courage. He had the truth about Morn's crimes. And he had the ghost of Marcus, whose belief in connection beyond species was about to be vindicated in ways no one could have predicted. The ship landed in a hurricane of displaced air and crystalline dust. The ramp lowered, and Dr. Selric Morn stepped out, looking exactly as Daniel remembered, cold, calculating, and absolutely certain of his superiority. He had no idea what was waiting for him in the caves. Dr. Selric Morn hadn't changed much in 3 years. His hair was perhaps more silver, his face more deeply lined, but his eyes remained the same, cold, calculating, utterly certain of his own superiority. He descended the ramp with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences, flanked by 4 military escorts in full combat armor. Behind him came 2 others. Daniel didn't recognize. The first was tall and angular, with the distinctive bone ridges and amber skin of a Drakari. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the clinical detachment in those 4 eyes, the way they cataloged everything as data points, rather than experiences. The second was human, young, perhaps 25, with nervous energy that suggested this was her first field assignment. "Daniel," Morn said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescending disappointment. "I'd hoped exile would teach you humility. Instead, I find you've been playing in the dirt with primitives. Asha's tail went rigid beside him, but she kept her expression neutral. They'd discussed this. Let Morn talk. Let him feel in control. Lead him exactly where they wanted him. Dr. Morn, Daniel replied, keeping his voice steady. I've made discoveries here that surpass anything in my previous research. Have you now? Morn's smile was thin, predatory. Your last report was inadequate. The moss samples you documented showed no special properties beyond basic bioluminescence. Either you're incompetent or you're hiding something. Neither option speaks well of your judgment. The Drakari stepped forward, a scanner in one of its 4 hands. Dr. Morn, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the cave system. The patterns are consistent with consciousness-responsive organisms. Excellent observation. Korvax, Morn said, never taking his eyes off Daniel. It seems our exile has been busy after all. Tell me, Daniel, what exactly have you found in those caves? This was the moment. Daniel felt Asha's tail brush against his leg. Just once. Encouragement. Trust. Something that will change everything, Daniel said, letting excitement creep into his voice. The spores in the deep caves, they don't just respond to consciousness. They can reshape it. Complete neural mapping, emotional regulation, even thought insertion. I've tested it myself. The young woman gasped. That's impossible. The ethics alone. Quiet, Mira, Morn snapped. Then, to Daniel. You've tested it on yourself. Show me the data. Daniel pulled up his datapad, displaying carefully edited footage from their time in the spore cave. He'd removed the audio, showing only the visual effects, the auras of emotion, the visible thought patterns, the moment of complete sensory overwhelming. What looked like loss of control to them would appear as successful manipulation to Morn. Fascinating, Morn murmured, his eyes gleaming with avarice. And the native, she's been exposed as well. Extensively, Daniel lied. The Lurnari neural structure makes them particularly susceptible. Complete compliance can be achieved with proper dosage. Asha played her part perfectly, keeping her tail artificially still, her expression blank. To someone who didn't know better, she might have appeared drugged or controlled. Morn stepped closer, circling them both like a predator. Show me. Make her do something against her nature. Prove your control. Daniel pretended to concentrate, then nodded to Asha. She moved her tail through a series of positions that to Morn would look like commanded behavior, but Daniel recognized as a deeply insulting gesture in Lurnari culture, essentially calling Morn a waste of biological material. Remarkable, Morn said, completely missing the insult. And this can be weaponized, deployed on a large scale. With the right equipment and extraction methods, yes. But the source cave is delicate. Too many people, too much disruption, and the spores die. You'll need to see it yourself, with a minimal team. Korvax's 4 eyes narrowed with suspicion. This seems convenient. Why would you share this with us after your previous deception? Daniel let desperation show on his face. Because I want my life back, my career, my reputation. I know what you really want, Dr. Morn. Not just weapons, but control. This gives you both. Morn was silent for a long moment, studying them. Then he turned to his escorts. Secure the perimeter. No one in or out. Korvax, prepare biocontainment protocols. Mira, document everything. He looked back at Daniel. You'll take me to this cave. Just the 2 of us and your pet. The native is necessary, Daniel said quickly. The Lurnari have a symbiotic relationship with the caves. Without her presence, the spores remain dormant. How convenient, Morn said dryly. Very well. But if this is a trap, Daniel, if you're wasting my time again, I'll ensure you spend the rest of your very short life begging for death. The Lurnari female will make an interesting test subject for some of my other projects. Asha's tail twitched, just once, but she maintained her facade. Daniel felt rage building in his chest but forced it down. Soon, very soon. They made their way toward the cave system, Morn following closely, with a hand weapon drawn. Behind them, at a distance, the military escorts maintained a perimeter. Daniel could feel the timer of his dead man's switch counting down. 40 minutes until the next input was required. "Tell me about the primitive," Morn said as they walked. The report mentioned a previous mate killed by local fauna. Emotional instability would explain her susceptibility to the spores. "Her name is Asha," Daniel said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Names are for equals. Daniel. She's a test subject. Nothing more." Morn gestured with his weapon. "Though I am curious about their tail movements. Your original research suggested emotional communication through physical gesture. Have you documented this?" The question was a trap. Morn knew about his research here, had probably been monitoring his communications all along. "Extensively," Daniel admitted. "The tail positions correspond to emotional states. But it's far more complex than simple expressions. It's an entire language, with grammar, syntax, even generational memory encoded in movement patterns." Show generational memory. Morn's interest sharpened. "You mean they can transmit actual information through genetic behavioral patterns?" "More than that. Each Lunari tale tells the complete story of their lineage. Every joy, every trauma, every significant moment encoded in muscle memory and passed down. It's proof of my original theory about universal emotional architecture." Morn laughed, cold and dismissive. "Still chasing fantasies. Daniel, what you're describing is anthropomorphization, nothing more. You see patterns because you want them to exist." They reached the cave entrance. Inside, Daniel could hear the faint whisper of spores moving in air currents. The Vurak Alpha was deeper in, hidden, waiting. Kip was positioned at a secondary entrance, ready to provide distraction. "The concentration increases as we go deeper," Daniel explained, leading them inside. "The initial exposure is mild, just enhanced perception. But in the main chamber, the effect is transformative." The walls began their responsive pulsing, reacting to their heartbeats. Morn's eyes widened with genuine fascination. Consciousness-responsive crystalline structures. The military applications alone. "That's nothing compared to what's ahead," Daniel said, guiding them deeper. The first wisps of spores became visible, glowing faintly in the darkness. Morn immediately pulled out a breathing mask. "No," Daniel said quickly. "The masks prevent proper neural integration. The spores need to interact with your respiratory system to create the correct chemical bonds. It's perfectly safe at this concentration." Morn hesitated, then slowly lowered the mask. "If you're lying to me, Daniel." "You'll know soon enough," Daniel replied. They entered the first major chamber, where the spore concentration was notably higher. Daniel watched as Morn's pupils began to dilate, the first signs of the neurotoxin taking effect. Asha maintained her controlled posture, but her tale was beginning to tell a different story to anyone who could read it: anticipation, controlled fury, and something that looked like hunting behavior. "I feel different," Morn said, his voice slightly slurred. "Enhanced. I can see layers." "That's the first stage," Daniel explained. "Your brain is creating new neural pathways, allowing you to perceive emotional energy as visible light. Look at Asha." Morn turned to study her, and his expression shifted to wonder. Around Asha, false auras appeared, carefully controlled bioluminescent bacteria Daniel had applied to her fur, creating the illusion of emotional manipulation. "She's radiating compliance," Morn breathed. "I can actually see her thoughts conforming to—" Wait. The real spore effects were beginning. The false auras were fading, replaced by the true emotional resonance. And what Morn saw around Asha was not compliance, but rage, carefully controlled and directed entirely at him. "What is this?" Morn raised his weapon, but his movements were becoming sluggish. "Truth," Daniel said simply. "The spores don't create control, Doctor. They reveal what's already there. Every hidden thought, every buried emotion, every crime you've tried to forget." Morn tried to back away, but the spores were in his system now. His eyes went wide as visions began manifesting in the crystalline walls around them. Marcus, working peacefully in the Crystal Grove. Morn's team tranquilizing the Vurak Alpha, performing crude surgery to implant crystalline weapons in its body. The moment of release, when the tortured creature went mad with pain and killed the first person it encountered. "No," Morn gasped. "That was necessary. For science. For progress." "Say his name," Asha commanded, dropping all pretense. Her tail was lashing now, fury given physical form. "Say the name of the man you murdered." "I didn't. It was the creature." "That you turned into a weapon," Asha snarled. "Say his name." "Marcus," Morn whispered, the spores compelling truth. Marcus Delan, xenobiologist, pacifist, in the wrong place at the wrong time. More truths came pouring out. The other experiments, on a dozen worlds. Species made extinct in the name of weapons development. Colleagues discredited or killed when they asked too many questions. Daniel's career destroyed not because his theories were wrong, but because they were right. And Morn couldn't let anyone else claim credit for discoveries he planned to steal. "You were so close," Morn babbled, tears streaming down his face as the spores forced him to confront every buried guilt. "Your emotional communication theory would have revolutionized xenobiology. I couldn't let you publish first. I had to be the one. It had to be me." Daniel activated his recorder, capturing every confession. But the spores weren't done with Morn yet. The doctor fell to his knees as deeper truths emerged. His childhood, desperate for approval from parents who saw him as disappointment. His first betrayal, stealing credit from his own mentor. The gradual transformation from scientist to monster, each compromise making the next easier. "I can feel them," Morn sobbed. "All of them. Every person I've hurt. They're here, in the walls, in the air. Marcus is here. He's watching me." And in a way, he was. The caves did remember. Just as Asha had said, they held the imprint of everyone who'd passed through, and the spores were making Morn experience every one of their perspectives. "Please," Morn begged, looking at Daniel. "Make it stop. I'll confess everything. I'll restore your reputation. Just make it stop." "I can't," Daniel said truthfully. "The spores will run their course. You'll survive, probably. But you'll never be able to lie again. Every time you try, you'll remember this moment." A roar echoed through the cave. The Vurak Alpha emerged from the deeper chambers, moving slowly but deliberately toward Morn. Its 6 eyes fixed on the man who'd tortured it, who'd turned it into a killer against its nature. Morn screamed, trying to run, but the spores had destroyed his coordination. He crawled backward, babbling apologies that 3 years too late. The Vurak Alpha stopped just short of Morn, looking down at the pathetic figure. Then it did something unexpected. It turned away, dismissing him as not worth the effort. The contempt in that gesture was more devastating than any attack. "It forgives you," Asha said, though her tone suggested she didn't share the sentiment. "The spores are healing it, reversing the damage you did. It wants to live, not kill. That's the difference between us and you." Footsteps echoed from the cave entrance. The military escorts had heard Morn's screams. Daniel quickly uploaded all the recorded confessions to his encrypted cloud, then sent copies to every major news outlet and scientific journal in known space. "Done," he said to Asha. "Whatever happens next, the truth is out there." Korvax appeared first, his 4 eyes taking in the scene. Morn sobbing on the ground. The Vurak Alpha retreating into the shadows. Daniel and Asha standing together. Fascinating, the Drakari said in his emotionless tone. The doctor appears to have suffered a psychological break. The spores, I assume. Truth serum in its purest form, Daniel confirmed. He's confessed to multiple murders, illegal experimentation, and academic fraud. It's all recorded. I see. Korvax studied them with those unblinking eyes. And you expect me to arrest him to support your version of events? I expect you to do what Drakari always do, Asha said. Her tail moving in a pattern, Daniel recognized as calculated risk. Follow logic to its conclusion. Indeed. Korvax was silent for a moment, then spoke into his communicator. This is Korvax. Dr. Morn has become compromised. Initiate containment procedures for Class 9 psychological contamination. All personnel maintain distance from the cave system. He looked back at Daniel and Asha. The Drakari have been observing Dr. Morn's activities for some time. His methods were becoming inefficient. Emotional volatility led to poor decision-making. You've provided the catalyst for a necessary change in leadership. You're not going to arrest us, Daniel asked, surprised. For what, defending yourselves against an unstable individual who entered a dangerous cave system against local advice? Korvax's expression might have been amusement, though it was hard to tell with Drakari. No, I think not. Though I would be interested in your actual research, Mr. Cross. Your theories about emotional communication have merit that Dr. Morn's prejudice prevented him from seeing. Mira appeared at the cave entrance, breathing hard from running. Sir, I've contained the doctor, but he won't stop talking. He's confessing to things that aren't even crimes, just embarrassing personal details. The spores will wear off in a few hours, Daniel said. But the compulsion for honesty might last days or weeks. I'd keep him isolated. Noted. Korvax turned to leave, then paused. The Vurak Alpha. Is it truly healing? See for yourself, Asha said. The creature emerged once more, and in better light, the changes were visible. The crystalline growths were already beginning to separate from its body, rejected by its natural immune system, now that the spores were counteracting Morn's modifications. Its eyes, while still wary, no longer held the mad pain that had driven it to kill. Remarkable, Korvax said. Perhaps there's something to be said for this connection between species you speak of. I'll include that in my report. As the Drakari departed with the still, babbling Morn and the bewildered Mira, Daniel felt the tension finally leave his body. They'd done it. The truth was revealed. Morn was finished. And somehow they'd survived. Asha's tail wrapped around his wrist, the gesture now familiar and welcome. Marcus would be proud, she said softly. He was right all along, Daniel replied. Connection is possible. Understanding can overcome fear. The Vurak Alpha approached them one last time. It lowered its massive head in what was unmistakably a bow, then disappeared into the deep caves, where it could heal in peace. So what now? Asha asked. Your reputation will be restored. You can return to your old life. Daniel looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at her tail. Not at the patterns of communication. But at her. The person who'd saved his life, challenged his assumptions, and shown him truths he'd never have discovered alone. My old life didn't have you in it, he said simply. Her tail did something new, something he'd never seen before. It moved in a complex spiral that seemed to encompass joy, hope, and possibility all at once. The university might have issues with that, she teased. Then I'll find a new university. Or better yet, we'll build our own research station here. Study the real connections between species, without the politics and prejudice. If you'll have me, as a research partner, and maybe, he hesitated, then took the plunge. Something more? Asha's answer wasn't in words. It was in the way her tail curved around both of them, creating a circle of connection that said everything that needed to be said. Later. as they emerged from the cave to find Kip trying to convince the remaining military escorts that he was programmed for aggressive negotiations. Daniel couldn't help but laugh. The robot had apparently been practicing Vurak mating calls and was deeply offended that no one appreciated his linguistic range. "I save everyone with my strategic audio deployment, and this is the thanks I get," Kip complained. "Next time, you can face the murder beasts without my help." "There won't be a next time," Daniel said, but he was wrong. There would be many next times, many adventures, many discoveries. But now he wouldn't face them as an exile trying to prove his worth. He'd face them with a partner who understood that true communication went beyond words. That connection transcended species, and that sometimes the best discoveries came from being willing to see patterns others missed. The binary suns of Thalrix set as they made their way back to camp, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Asha's tail swayed in contentment, occasionally brushing against Daniel in what he now knew was affection. They had work to do. The recordings of Morn's confessions would need to be verified. The Vurak Alpha would need monitoring as it healed. The caves would need to be protected from future exploitation. But for now, they walked together through the bioluminescent jungle. Two people from different worlds who'd found a common language in the most unexpected place. And in the shadows, Marcus's ghost finally found peace. The weeks following Morn's arrest passed in a blur of activity. Daniel's research had been validated publicly, his reputation restored with interest. Universities across known space sent offers, each more lucrative than the last. But he remained on Thalrix, working alongside Asha, to establish what they'd begun calling the Marcus Deland Memorial Research Station. The morning everything changed started like any other. Daniel was in the Crystal Grove, documenting the healing songs the formations produced when touched by recovered Vurak. Asha was teaching a group of young Lurnari researchers how to properly harvest moss without damaging its consciousness, responsive properties. Kip was complaining about the humidity, while simultaneously refusing all offers to be upgraded to a newer model. Then Korvax returned. The Drakari's ship landed without warning, its sleek design a stark contrast to the organic curves of the jungle. Daniel and Asha met him at the landing site, both wary. In their experience, unexpected visits rarely brought good news. "Mr. Cross, Miss Asha," Korvax said, his four eyes focusing on them with that unsettling intensity unique to his species. "I bring interesting news. If this is about Morn trying to recant his confession, we have everything documented," Daniel said quickly. "Dr. Morn is in permanent psychiatric care," Korvax replied. The spore exposure had lasting effects. He now compulsively confesses to everyone he meets, including fabricated crimes he wishes he'd committed. Quite fascinating from a psychological perspective. But that's not why I'm here. Asha's tail shifted to alert position. "Then why?" Korvax pulled out a datapad, its screen showing what looked like surveillance footage. "The Drakari Collective has been monitoring your work here. Not just recently, but for the past 6 months. Every interaction, every discovery, every moment of connection between you two." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "You've been spying on us." "Studying," Korvax corrected. "You see, Mr. Cross, your theory about universal emotional communication wasn't just of academic interest. It was a test." "A test," Asha's tail was now lashing with anger. "We were an experiment. The most important experiment in xenological history," Korvax said calmly. "The Drakari Collective has been searching for proof that true interspecies understanding is possible. Not just communication, but genuine emotional connection that transcends biological boundaries. You two have provided that proof." He touched the datapad, and holographic images filled the air around them. Daniel saw himself and Asha in dozens of moments their first meeting. The fight with the carnivorous plant, the moment in the spore cave when they'd confessed their feelings, their battle against Morn's lies. Every major species in the galaxy has representatives who believe cooperation is impossible. Korvax continued. That we're too different, too alien to each other for true unity. These voices push for isolation, for conflict, for the kind of exploitation Morn represented. The Drakari Collective needed proof that they were wrong. So you used us, Daniel said, anger building. Our trauma, our growth, our love, it was all just data to you. No, Korvax said, and for the first time, Daniel heard something like emotion in the Drakari's voice. It was hope. You see, the collective is not what you think. We're not cold observers. We're mediators, trying to prevent a war that statistical models suggest is inevitable. Different species are expanding, resources are limited, and understanding is rare. Without proof that connection is possible, the isolationists win. Asha stepped forward, her tale now in a complex pattern Daniel recognized as deep thought. You're saying our relationship, our work here, it's being used as evidence. More than that, Korvax said. He gestured, and new images appeared. Schools across the galaxy where Daniel's emotional communication theories were being taught. Hospitals using Asha's moss harvesting techniques. Peace treaties being negotiated using principles derived from their research. Your connection has become a symbol, Korvax explained. The story of a discredited human scientist and a grieving Lurnari warrior who found understanding in the most unlikely place. It's already preventing conflicts, building bridges. Daniel's anger was fading, replaced by something more complex. But you still watched us without our knowledge, studied us like we were specimens. Yes, Korvax admitted. And for that, the collective offers both apology and compensation. We're prepared to fund your research station for the next century. Full autonomy, no oversight, unlimited resources. All we ask is that you continue your work and occasionally share your findings. And if we refuse, Asha asked, then we leave and never return. The footage we've collected will be destroyed. Your story remains your own. Daniel and Asha exchanged looks. Her tale moved through a quick series of positions. Uncertainty, consideration, question. He nodded slightly. Understanding. We need time to discuss this, Daniel said. Of course. I'll wait at my ship. Korvax turned to go, then paused. There's one more thing. The invitation. He handed them a sealed message container. The Galactic Council is forming a new department. Interspecies Emotional Communication and Understanding. They want you both as founding directors. The position comes with significant influence over policy, the ability to prevent future Morns from operating, and the resources to protect places like Thalrix. After Korvax left, Daniel and Asha sat in the Crystal Grove, the container unopened between them. The crystals hummed their ancient songs, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the Vurak Alpha's contented rumble as it basked in the binary suns. We were never alone, Asha said finally, her tale expressing a mixture of violation and wonder. Every moment, even the private ones. Does it change anything? Daniel asked. What we built, what we feel? Asha was quiet for a long moment. Then her tale began to move in a pattern he'd never seen before. It started with the spiral that meant connection beyond species. Then flowed into something more complex. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic. This is new, she said. I'm creating it now, for us. It means truth discovered while being watched is still truth. Love that grows under observation is still love. The pattern continued, and Daniel found himself mesmerized. It was like watching a dance, or a mathematical equation being solved in physical form. The tale curved in a figure eight, but slowly, with pauses at specific points that seemed to hold meaning. The top of the eight is discovery, Asha explained as she moved. The crossing point is challenge. The bottom is understanding. And the motion itself. The infinity of it. That's forever, Daniel finished, It means forever. Even if the whole galaxy is watching, she agreed. They opened the container together. Inside was not just the formal invitation, but something else, a small recording device. When activated, it projected an image of Marcus, recorded years ago, speaking at a xenobiology conference. True connection between species isn't just possible, Marcus was saying, his passion evident in every word. It's inevitable. We just have to be brave enough to be vulnerable, wise enough to listen, and patient enough to learn each other's languages, even the ones without words. The recording ended, and Asha's tail wrapped around Daniel's hand, squeezing gently. He would want us to accept, she said, to use what the Drakari learned to help others. Even though they watched us without permission, even though they turned our pain into data. Especially because of that, Asha said. If our story is already being used, shouldn't we have a say in how? Daniel thought about all they'd been through. The betrayal by Morn, the discovery of the spore's truth-telling properties, the slow building of trust between two people who had every reason to remain isolated. If their journey could prevent others from suffering the same betrayals, facing the same isolation. We accept, he said, but on our terms. The research station remains independent. The Lurnari maintain control over their sacred sites. And Kip gets those upgrades he keeps refusing. I heard that Kip called from across the grove. I don't need upgrades. I'm perfectly functional with my personality quirks and outdated circuits. Asha's tail vibrated with laughter. And Kip stays exactly as he is. They stood together in the grove, surrounded by singing crystals, and the knowledge that their most private moments had been public all along. It should have felt like a violation. In many ways. It was. But it was also validation. Their connection wasn't fantasy or projection. It was real enough that an entire galactic collective had deemed it worth studying, worth protecting, worth sharing. There's something else, Korvax said, appearing at the grove's edge. They hadn't heard him approach. The collective wanted you to know we weren't the only ones watching. He gestured to the Vurak Alpha, which had approached silently, to the crystals, which seemed to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeats, to the very air around them, thick with spores and consciousness. Thalrix itself has been observing, learning. The planet's ecosystem is more interconnected than we understood. Every organism here, from the moss to the Vurak, has been participating in your story. You've taught them as much as they've taught you. As if to confirm this, the Vurak Alpha approached Daniel and Asha, its massive head lowered until it was eye level with them, and its tail, so different from a Lurnari's but still expressive, moved in a pattern that unmistakably mirrored the figure 8 Asha had just created. It learned, Daniel breathed. It learned the symbol for forever. All of Thalrix learned, Korvax confirmed. The spores carry memory. The crystals transmit emotion. The moss responds to intention. This entire planet has become a living testament to your theories, Mr. Cross, and to your courage, Miss Asha. The weight of it all was overwhelming. They hadn't just been conducting research or building a relationship. They'd been teaching an entire world how to connect across species boundaries. The invitation stands, Korvax said. But whether you accept or not, know that what you've accomplished here has already changed everything. The recording of Morn's confession led to dozens of his co-conspirators being arrested. Research stations across the galaxy are adopting ethical harvesting practices. And the footage of you two, working together, trusting each other, loving each other despite your differences. It's ended 3 territorial disputes in the last month alone. He turned to leave, then paused one final time. Oh, and the Drakari who suggested this observation project. It was me. I had a theory that emotional connection could be documented and taught. You've proven me right. Thank you. After he left, Daniel and Asha stood in the singing grove, processing everything they'd learned. The twist that their entire journey had been orchestrated, or at least observed, should have diminished what they'd built. But somehow, it didn't. "We were real," Asha said, her tale moving through expressions of love, determination, and hope. "Even performed on a stage we didn't know existed. We were real. And we'll continue to be real," Daniel agreed. "Whether in a private research station or on the Galactic Council, our truth doesn't change just because others witnessed it." That night, they returned to the stone shelter where they'd first camped, the place where Daniel had initially broken the taboo of observing Asha's tale. It looked different now, knowing that moment had been recorded, studied, analyzed. But it also looked the same, a place where two people had started to see each other clearly. "I love you," Daniel said. The words simple but weighted with everything they'd experienced. Asha's response was in movement. Her tale performed the complete lexicon of their relationship: fear, curiosity, anger, understanding, trust, joy, and finally, love. It was a story told in motion, their entire journey compressed into a dance that only they could fully understand. "I love you too," she said when the movement stopped. "Observed or unobserved, studied or private, forever." They sat together as the binary sun set, their silhouettes merging in the dying light. Tomorrow, they would send their response to the Galactic Council. They would begin the work of turning their experience into curriculum, their connection into a bridge for others to cross. But tonight, they simply existed together, two people from different worlds who had found a common language. And if the Drakari were still watching, if Thalrix itself was learning from their example, then let them see this too, that love wasn't diminished by observation. If anything, it was strengthened by the knowledge that their truth had been tested and found genuine. In the shelter, Kip powered down for the night. His last words a complaint about the philosophical implications of free will in an observed universe. The Vurak Alpha settled outside, standing guard, as it had begun doing since its healing. The crystals continued their eternal song, and Asha's tale, finally free from the weight of grief and secrets, moved in the figure 8 pattern she'd created, the symbol for forever, witnessed by the stars themselves. Their story, which had begun with mistrust and isolation, ended with connection that transcended not just species, but the very concept of privacy. They had been watched, studied, catalogued. But in the end, what the watchers had seen was real, two people choosing each other again and again, despite every reason not to. The twist was that there had never been a twist at all. Love observed was still love. Truth documented was still truth. And connection, whether between two individuals or two species or an entire galaxy, was always worth the vulnerability it required. As Daniel drifted off to sleep, Asha's tail wrapped gently around his wrist. He thought about the invitation to the Galactic Council. They would accept, he knew, not because they'd been manipulated into it, but because their story, observed or not, had always been heading toward this, a chance to teach others what Marcus had always believed. That understanding was possible. That connection transcended difference. That sometimes, the most important discoveries came from being willing to be seen, truly seen, by another consciousness. Even if the whole galaxy was watching. Especially then,